With protesters in France entering the seventh day of strikes and demonstrations against draconian austerity measures, many political observers in the US are now wondering how long it'll be before similar scenes unfold in American streets. With even Time magazine now conceding that the prospect of civil war in the United States doesn't seem that far fetched. To be clear, Gandal's article entitled Will the Reserve Cause a Civil War largely dismisses the possibility that the Fed's upcoming November 3rd meeting, during which Ben Bernanke is expected to announce a fresh round of money printing, will prompt national uproar. But it doesn't exactly debunk the notion of longer term social dislocation as backlash to the crumbling economy. As many are now forecasting, as we highlighted yesterday in a piece that was later picked up by the Drudge Report, it it's only a matter of time before Americans are hit with almost identical austerity measures to those that have caused the French to set up fuel blockages, stage running battles with the rioting police, halt air and and rail travel, and virtually shut down some areas of the country. The question remains, how will Americans react if the Obama administration pushes ahead with its plan to seize all 401k private pension, which will be swallowed up by the Social Security Administration under the banner of mandatory guaranteed retirement accounts? How will Americans react to the upcoming announcement that the Federal Reserve will further eviscerate the value of the dollar by purchasing junk assets from big banks at exorbitant prices with the money printed from our printed out of thin air? Time magazine, which as a guardian of the establishment would normally be expected to disparage the potential of mass civil disobedience, actually lends to the notion some spotlight by linking to a zero hedge story which paraphrased economic forecast by David Rosenberg, who warns that the Reserve's plan for more quantitative easing positions US society one step closer to civil war, if not worse. The article also features a quote from the Washington blog piece, which warns that the Fed's policies could lead to the very destruction of the republic. In a very real sense, Bernanke is throwing Granny and Grandpa down the stairs on purpose. He is literally threatening those at the lower end of the economic strata, along with all who are retired, with starvation and death, and in a just nation where the rule of law controlled instead of being abused by the kleptocrats, he would be facing charges of sedition and conspiracy, as his policies will inevitably lead to the destruction of our republic. Lending, lending the notion credence, Gandel writes, quote, with the Tea Party gaining followers, the idea of civil war over economic issues does not seem that far fetched these days. Yes, you can even read, oh, end quote. Yes, you can even read, even Time magazine is now conceding that the current economic course of the nation could lead to outright civil war and revolution. Gandalf finishes the article by leaving prospects of widespread civil unrest as an open question. Quote, it seems clear that the Fed is likely to do, he writes, how the economy, the militia, and the rest of us react is up in the air. The countdown is on, T minus 15 days to Farmageddon. See you there, hopefully. End quote. Of course, people like Gerald Celente and the host of other economic forecasters have been predicting civil unrest, food riots, and tax rebellions for the past 2 years, but have but too has the Time magazine seriously entertained the notion of civil war in the United States, and it is a shocking reminder of just how close to the precipice we now stand. Numerous forecasters, governments, spy agencies, and international bodies are predicting mass riots and unrest in response to worsening economic picture. In November 2008, right as the economic implosion was unraveling, the U.S. Army War College released a white paper called Known called Known Unknowns: Conventional Strategic Shocks in Defense Strategy Development. The report warned that the military must be prepared for a, quote, violent strategic dislocation inside of the United States, end quote, which could be provoked by, quote, unforeseen economic collapse, purposeful domestic resistance, and pervasive public health emergencies, or loss of functioning political and legal order. The widespread violence, the document says would force defense establishment to reorient priorities to extremists to defend basic domestic order and human security. End quote. A British Ministry of Defense report struck a similar tone when it predicted that within 30 years the growing gap between the super rich and the middle class, along with urban underclass threatened social order, would mean, quote, the world's middle class might unite, using access to knowledge, resources, and skills to shape transitional processes in their own class interests, and that, quote, the middle class would become a revolutionary class, end quote. How Americans will react to what many see as a make or break moment for the U.S. economy, the Fed's announcement on November 3rd largely depends on how well they understand the fact that their financial future and that of their children now hangs in the balance like never before. As the Economic Collapse blog points out, QE2 represents the biggest bank robbery in history and is nothing less than another huge transfer of wealth from American taxpayers to big banks. The money Bernanke prints out of thin air, which will further devaluate the greenback, and every dollar earned or saved by the American citizens will be used to purchase large quantities of troubled assets from the U.S. banks at well above market price. Small banks will be allowed to wither and die, whereas the huge megaliths will collect mountains of free money at the expense of hardworking Americans. The long-term impact of the Fed buying these toxic junk assets with money printed out of thin air will be inflationary will be the inflationary holocaust that does nothing to rescue the US economy but everything to depreciate the very real asset of the American taxpayer. We are already on the road to serious inflation, and the Federal Reserve has not even fired up the money hoses yet. So what is going to happen after they pump trillions more into the economy? Printing more money and giving it to the banks is not going to solve our economic problems. It is just going to make them worse. But unfortunately, American voters get no say about any of this. Our national monetary policy is in the hands of an unelected central bank that does pretty much whatever it wants. If if many Americans were aware of what the Federal Reserve is going to do, or what the Federal Reserve is about to do with their financial future, as are knowledgeable about the are about you know Dancing with the Stars, then the Civil War, even Time magazine is now presenting as justifiable response to the crisis would be a very plausible prospect. As it stands, according to the majority of voters in our polls on prisonplanet.com, Americans will react to the situation not by organizing fuel blockage, marching in the streets, and shutting down the country, but by scratching their butts and flipping the TV channel. watch watching Matt, I don't know, explanation of what the Fed is about to do with your money.